I have recently finished my playthrough of the Dawntrail MSQ, and in fact, if you wanna see me play through it, you can find it here on my channel. But now that I'm done with the story, let's talk about what I liked about it and what I think could have been done better. When it comes to the overall Dawntrail MSQ, I would say it's just okay. It's not amazing, but it's not terrible. It has plenty of moments I really liked and some moments that I think were just more missed opportunities. The main theme this time around was the burden of expectation and what you're willing to do to protect your people. From the start, I felt it was clear that at least the first half of the expansion would be the story of Wuk Lamat, along with the story of Erenville and Krail. And I think through the Rite of Succession story, Wuk Lamat and Conat actually matured really nicely. I liked watching their character grow, and I really enjoyed who they are. Now, I wish there would have been more interaction between Erenville and Wuk Lamat, as they are childhood friends, but they did not really interact that much, which I found to be a little bit weird. I also would have liked to have a little bit more focus on Krail. I think overall the focus was a little bit too much on Wuk Lamat. Then we had also the twins traveling with us, which I honestly don't see the point of. I mean, I love the twins, I want them to travel with us, but at the same time, it didn't feel like they were adding anything to the story by being there. When it came to the environment, I found the zones to be beautiful. They were nicely varied, and there was a lot of nice cultural details in the earlier part. And I had a lot of fun with the Final Fantasy IX references in the latter part. The zone music was of course beautiful, and I really enjoyed the cultures that we met. I think the Rite of Succession was a very good base to have us travel around Zoraal and get to know the different people there, to build up a foundation for something greater. I found the 4 contenders to be interesting, though I wish we had seen more of Zoraal Ja, as I feel we more focused on Wuk Lamat, Quana, and Wuk Ja, with surprisingly little focus on Zoraal Ja considering how important he was gonna be in the story. For Wuk Ja, he was a neat character. I personally feel he changed a bit too quickly. I think he's meant to represent that he is kind of dropping the mask and finally showing his true self. And before he was kind of supposed to be pretending by like how he behaved. But I think he went too far in being an absolute asshole for us to just accept that, oh yeah, now he's changed and like this is the true Wuk Ja, because he released Valgarmanda. And that is such an evil act that I struggle with accepting his redemption. I would have liked to see more consequences, or simply to not have him redeemed at all. Zoraal Ja, on the other hand, has struggled with just not being represented at all. We got to see him from time to time, but we never got to understand him, and it was kind of weird that we didn't get to know much about his childhood with Wuk Lamat and Kona. The only sort of a detail thing we get to know is apparently he didn't speak a lot at dinner, and he was the leader of the Landsguard. But I feel we could have had so much more details and gotten to know who he was and what made him like he is. Not to redeem him, because it's okay to have a bad guy who is just bad, but to understand how he got more and more twisted, or what his motivations are, and has he always been like this, or is this something that got worse with time? Throughout all of the story, the biggest issue I found was simply lack of gameplay. Storytelling in Final Fantasy XIV has always been heavily reliant on go talk to this person, watch the cinematic, and kinda just being there for the story. But before, I feel like they've done better with mixing in enough gameplay to not make you feel like you're just walking through sort of a interactive story. And in those cases, the interaction is mostly walk to this person and then walk to that person. The gameplay sequences that were there were really good. I loved the dungeon. The trials are really fun. but I just feel like there should have been much more gameplay. This is kind of painful, especially when you think about the first 2 zones, beating the Pelu Pelu and the Hanu Hanu. Both stories are quite nice, but I think I was lucky to actually do the Pelu Pelu first, because when I did that, I was still so just excited about being in a new expansion. The whole trading items thing didn't really bother me. And then the Hanu Hanu questline was a little bit more exciting, even though that was also mostly just talking to everybody. I think if I had done it the other way around, it would have been more obvious that the Pelu Pelu questline should have involved some gameplay. I mean, both of them should have involved more gameplay. They need more gameplay in the game. This is a problem we've seen also in previous patches, but the good thing with the patches is that at least each patch came with a dungeon, and the patch story isn't that insanely long. But when you get an entire expansion story, or well, the release story at least, in this format with only occasional dungeons and trials and such, it becomes way too long between something happening. In fact, to the point that in later recordings, as I was going through the story, I started just unsummoning my Chocobo because he would only be in the way. I knew I wasn't about to fight anything. But I think some of the biggest missed opportunities is where they chose to use cinematics instead of gameplay. The biggest offender here is the train scene as we're heading to the Vanguard dungeon. In the cinematic, we get to see our friends fighting, and then we get to see ourselves mounting a cannon and shooting at enemies. We already have a shooting minigame in the Gold Saucer, meaning they could have simply ported over those mechanics into the train event and let us use the cannons. Because cinematics are amazing, I love them, I think they're a lot of fun, but gameplay is more fun than cinematics, and I would prefer to have more gameplay and less cinematics, especially in moments like this. This felt weird, and I honestly was a little bit disappointed by the fact that I did not get to play through the scene, because it looked like a really cool setup. I was excited to get to play with the turrets, and then I just didn't. I mean, my character looked awesome as always, but it just wasn't the same. Now, the overall cinematic heaviness of this expansion, though, I don't mind. I like the cinematics and the different animations, though I would prefer to have much more voice acting. I know voice acting is expensive, but there are moments where I feel voice acting would have really worked out well, especially with a lot of the scenes with Zoraal Ja. Most of those should have been voice acted, and I was sad to see how few of them were actually voice acted. So if we're gonna have this much cinematics, maybe it's also time to start upping the voice acting a little bit. We got some great voice actors for the game, so let's utilize them. But overall, I found the Rite of Succession saga to be alright. I didn't mind being sort of a side character in Wuk Lamat's story, as we got to know the nation's politics and the people of Zoraal. Especially as we had the mystery of the City of Gold, which I was excited to discover. Though it was rather jarring to find the gate to the City of Gold and then just immediately get yanked away to the coronation ceremony. And it kind of made me assume that we would deal more with the gate later on. I was happy to see Kona and Wuk Lamat lead the city together, and I think it would have been best for everybody if, after the coronation ceremony, Wuk Lamat would have stayed in the capital. Now, after the coronation ceremony, the story both gets better, but also so much worse. Because straight after the ceremony, we go to Shalani with Erinwil to go visit his mum. And this felt really aimless and not what I was most excited for. We had just found the gate to the City of Gold. Zoraal Ja is about to tell Wuk Lamat and everybody like a lot of these secrets, and we're going to deal with cowboys and corrupt sheriffs. It just was not interesting. The whole thing around the train I kinda liked, and I did like finding Namika. But I think Shalani was simply way too long. It kind of dragged on. And the entire time I was just constantly thinking about, okay, now we've done the coronation. When am I getting to Solution 9? Like, when is the stuff gonna happen? It was really hard to immerse myself in the story because it felt like a filler. It really felt like, oh, this is just the thing you have to get through for things to start happening. And that is how it ended up being, because as soon as the dome appeared, that's when the story again picked up and got really interesting. So I think Shalani was entirely just a mistake. Now, personally, what I think would have worked better is that in Shalani, we would have met Kakia, and we should have gone there in some relation to the City of Gold and Kryle's and Erenville's story. There is a level 100 dungeon in that area that has some Yokyu ruins. Maybe that could have been an interesting story, but this would have been the perfect time to maybe meet Namika again, get to know Kakia in person before the whole dome and living memory thing, and to learn more about Erenville's childhood. The whole story about the duels and the sheriff should be cut out. It just did not serve the narrative. It felt way too much like a filler and just overall not that enjoyable. But I think me and probably many others breathed a sigh of relief when the dome appeared and the attack on Tuliyollal happened, because that was sort of the sign of the story starting up again. Now, the attack on Tuliyollal was really good. I like the temporary changes it made to the city, and it really established the people in the dome as a threat. My main gripe with it is the fight between Zoraal Ja and Zoraal Ja, as I find that one kinda dumb. The first fight was fine with them like dueling, but as soon as Zoraal Ja kinda came back to life, I feel anyone would step in and help Zoraal Ja simply because by this point, this is no longer a fair fight. If Zoraal Ja can just come back to life, he can't die, that is no longer like a regular duel. And at least my Warrior of Light would have stepped in and gone like, yo, I wanna, take part in this. Like, we're gonna have to deal with this. We cannot have a duel to the death if one character can't die. That just doesn't work. It made the end of Zoraal Ja kind of feel unearned. It was definitely sad, but it felt more kind of dumb than painful. But after that, we start our journey into the dome. I think at this point, Wuk Lamat should have stayed in the city. It doesn't make sense to me that after your previous leader dies, that one of your new leaders goes to a dome where they might or might not die and nobody knows what's on the inside. Where we kind of move from Wuk Lamat's story to the science again. I think the team that should have gone inside would obviously be Erenville, because this is his homeland, Kryle, because this is the history, because he came from the City of Gold, and this is definitely related to the City of Gold. And then from the science, I would have liked to see Yestola come along, as he can both see ether, and he's studying all sorts of transportation between the different shards. Rahatia, because he has experience in transporting big things between the shards. And then Urian J, because he's simply a walking encyclopedia. And Thenkeret, because he's a master spy and great at tracking. But removing Wuk Lamat from this part of the story would have allowed us to focus much more on Erenville and Kryle. But overall, the later part of the story I really liked. I think Spene is an interesting antagonist. The whole system with the souls I find extremely disturbing, especially when we learn that the regulators don't just help you come back if you die, but they also delete the memories of people who have permanently died. That was probably the most disturbing part of the expansion, when we went around and found out that nobody could remember Namika, even if these were the people who were with us when she died. I think the 30-year gap was a nice touch, though again I wish we had met Kakia before the dome, which would have given us more investment into her. Spene herself is a good villain. I am genuinely glad that Wuk Lamat failed in saving her through friendship. as I think it's important that not everything can be fixed by getting to know people and making friends. Sometimes people just can't be fixed, or we are simply on such opposing sides that we will never be able to come to a solution that works for both of us. And the evolution of Spene throughout, as we saw her be the sweet person, and then her choice of simply deleting who she was so she could become the queen she thought her people needed, was like, it was really neat. On the other hand, Zoraal Ja kinda flopped for me. I never could really understand his thought process. And then I don't mean he doesn't need to be like a sympathetic villain or anything. He didn't make sense. I mean, at least with Van Daniel, we just knew he wanted to die and to take everybody with him. And that was his motivation, and it made sense. I feel like Zoraal Ja's kind of logic of, I want to teach people that war is bad by going to war, never really made sense to me. And by the point he was in the dome, I just didn't really connect with his character. So he never managed to become that interesting for me, and then he just died in a trial. I think he was simply wasted. They could have done something more with him. I think a lot of the build-up and asshole behavior we got from Wuk Lamat should have been more focused on Zoraal Ja. Going into living memory was really neat. I liked that zone. It was very unique going around and basically deleting everybody, turning off each area and watching like this really pretty place just become dark and dead. This was also the place where we got a little bit more Erinwell story, though not that much. And then we got the sort of conclusion or something to Kryle's story, along with the information about the Malala. But because we didn't really build up Kakia enough, or Erinwell's story or Kryle's story, it felt like it wasn't the payoff it should have been. I still enjoyed going through the areas and sort of turning them off. And of course we ended with an amazing trial, and I found the final cinematic of the expansion to be really nice. And I left the expansion relatively happy, and I'm still pretty happy with the story. It's not amazing, it's not terrible, it's just okay. There was a lot of really fun different moments. Wuk Evu is one of my favorite characters in the expansion, with his ongoing joke about like offering people to take his head for being accidentally rude, and then immediately just flipping to like, okay, if I don't have to worry about it, then I won't. I have not gotten tired of that joke yet, so I hope they keep on coming with it because I think it's kind of funny. I would have liked to learn more about the Yakyu, and I hope we learn more about them in like the future patches. And I think overall they managed to set up the story nicely for future content. Now we do have the key, so I'm hoping we will start investigating the key on like what it can do and like if it can actually help us go to other reflections. There is something weird going on with Svene's crown, which is very exciting. And the good thing about the expansion is that while the story was just okay, it's not over. We still have all of the patches to go, which is going to continue the story, of course. While the story is obviously a big part of the expansion, there is so much more story to come and so much more content. We of course are getting the new raid, there are new variant dungeons, variety of new dungeons, that new lifestyle content of building in other planets or something. And then they're talking about some sort of a content similar to Boscia or Eureka. And then possibly even a new deep dungeon. It sounds like we're getting a lot of new content in the expansion, so I think we're gonna have a lot of fun with it. And while the story was just okay, and it definitely suffered from following in the footsteps of Endwalker and Shadowbringers, who were just amazing, I think overall I'm quite happy. The main thing I hope they do before they release more story content is to focus more on balancing story and gameplay. But those are my thoughts on the story. Tell me, what do you think? Do you agree with me? Disagree with me? What were your favorite parts of the story? And was there something you didn't like? Let's talk about it all down in the comments. And while you're down there, throw me a commendation by liking and subscribing. And in the end, all I want to say is tack för att horva och the yndislegan dag.